Good morning. Ngatu Delek, Shubh Parvatam. My pranam and greeting to Swamiji and to all the abbots from different monasteries and the dignitaries on the stage. Because of the nature of this gathering, I'll speak first in English, which is my primary talk, and then maybe few minutes in Tibetan also on the 4 commitments. First of all, I would like to express my deep appreciation for the 4 settlements of Bylakuppe for so wonderfully organizing this celebration of Tibetan culture, which is really commemorating His Holiness's 90th birth anniversary. This is an occasion to really celebrate because it's very fortunate and lucky for all of us to have His Holiness amidst us, even at this very ripe age. And not only that, He promises that He will live another 30-40 years. And He is also very recently announced that His reincarnation will continue to come. So this is great news, good fortune to all of us. Now let me say a few points on the 4 commitments of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Not only we should listen to his 4 commitments, but we should also, in our personal life, try to live and practice the 4 commitments. And His Holiness's 4 principal commitments are very logical because he says, first of all, I am a human being. So as a human being, I have a responsibility towards promoting peace, happiness, and harmony among all humanity. So this first commitment is not about Tibet. It's about all humanity. And his second commitment says that because I'm a religious person, I'm a Buddhist, therefore I have the second responsibility of bringing harmony among all religious traditions. This second commitment also does not talk about Tibet. It is about interreligious harmony. His third commitment is on Tibet because he is a Tibetan. So those of you who are Indian, you have a responsibility to your country, India, and those of us who belong to different countries, they have a responsibility to their own country. Out of this 4 commitments, then the 4th commitment is preservation and promotion of Indian culture, Indian wisdom. His Holiness in this book, Voice for the Voiceless, right in the beginning, he mentions, I like to really read this one. Now I don't know whether I'll find it or not. Just a second. So anyway, His Holiness is, I know what is written there. So what His Holiness says is, out of these 4 commitments, the first, the second, and the 4th commitments are commitments that I made out of my free will, out of my choice. The 3rd commitment about Tibet is not something I choose, but it's something that I had to take right after my birth and having recognized as the Dalai Lama. Fortunately or unfortunately, I had to take this responsibility. Then His Holiness says, as far as the first 2 and the last one, the 3 commitments are concerned, His Holiness now at his 90-year celebration happily says, with regard to these 3 commitments, I made a lot of effort and achieved much. However, unfortunately, in the case of the 3rd commitment, the commitment about Tibet, that has proved to be the most difficult commitment for him because he is trying to talk to a counterpart which does not have this sense of sharing a mission. There's no sense of commitment. So the Chinese leaders, unfortunately, have mouth and no ear. That's why the problem of Tibet is still a huge unsolved problem. So let me say a few lines on each of these 4 commitments. The first commitment, as I mentioned earlier, is towards humanity. So there, His Holiness' focus is how to improve human values with the understanding that we all want happiness, do not want suffering. But the suffering comes unwillingly from negative emotions, destructive emotions within us: anger, jealousy, hatred, narrow-mindedness, competition. These negative emotions that is within us is the sole contributor towards having no problem and in fact having so much conflict in today's world. Therefore, His Holiness urges all of us human beings to improve the human values, to pay more attention to the human values, to think more about the sameness and not about the differences. And it is in this regard, he even went to the extent of introducing social, emotional, ethical learning. Sometimes we call it secular ethics, but it's basically social, emotional, ethical learning, which means that this kind of values are universal values, and it is a value that you must adopt based on your own common sense, common experience. It is a value that you must adopt based on your experience. So it is a value that you should inculcate from bottom up, not top down. You must inculcate these values, not because of any religious preaching or preaching of any other great teachers. For easier understanding of the students, I'll give you an example. For example, when you were born, after the birth, the first thing that the child does is what? What is the first thing the child does after the birth? What? Crying. Whether it's an Indian child, Tibetan child, American child, the first thing that the child does is crying. What do you think the child is asking by crying? The child is definitely not asking for a lengthy discourse on Buddhism or thereby any religion. The child is asking for somebody's loving kindness and compassion, unconditional love. So this kind of inborn need to have love, compassion, and kindness is in our body, in our blood, without referring to any particular religion. So we must imbibe, strengthen, and inculcate these universal values. Because these universal values are needed not only for people who believe in religion, it is needed even for those people who don't believe in religion. It is even needed for those who are anti-religion. So this should be universal. But this does not mean to say that we cannot take these universal messages from different religious traditions. From different religious traditions, so long as the message is universal, we can adopt that also. So that is the first commitment. The second commitment is religious harmony. Different religious traditions in the world are supposed to cure many of the human illnesses. But unfortunately, as history is in evidence, unfortunately sometimes we see more problem created by religions, which is unfortunate, very, very unfortunate, because this is like medicine becoming poison. So therefore, His Holiness is very much devoted towards improving religious harmony. And I myself had the privilege of joining him, sitting with the Christian brothers, sisters under Bodhi tree. Had the privilege of going for pilgrimage in Jerusalem, visiting the Dome of the Rock, the Wailing Wall, and the places of Christian practices. So religious harmony is extremely, extremely important. If you ask a question, which religion is best? This is a stupid question. This is like asking which medicine is best. You cannot pick up just one medicine and say this is best because it is good for you or it is pricey, right? For you, that particular medicine is best, which cures your personal illness. But this does not mean to say this is good for everybody. For example, the medicine for headache, which you may have, is not good for somebody who is having diarrhea. So for that person having diarrhea, that medicine for diarrhea is best. So Buddhism may be best for me, but that does not mean to say that Buddhism is best for everybody. So therefore, there should be religious pluralism. Different religious traditions, like a beautiful garden with many flowers. In a big garden, if there are only one kind of flower with one color, the garden may not look very beautiful. Just as you see the arrangement here, here also you have many flowers with different colors. So similarly, these different religious traditions cater to the mental disposition, interests, and needs of many people. So it is good to have many religions. But these different religious traditions are for helping humanity, not creating division. Third commitment, as I mentioned, is about Tibet. Now our 66 years. The problem with Tibet is more than 66 years now. Our land is ruled by the Chinese leaders, and the Chinese who are in Tibet are guests who are not invited by Tibet. They came to Tibet without invitation. That's the problem. Number of Tibetans are scattered all over the world, including India today, not because there was a civil war in Tibet, not because there was flood in Tibet. It is because of bullying and invasion and oppression of unfortunate bigger neighbor to a smaller neighbor. There was a time when they were using ruthless ways to destroy monasteries, kill monks and nuns, destroy temples and so forth. But today they are adopting other tactic. Without using obvious ruthless oppression, but they came up with a tactic to completely wipe out the very Tibetan identity. So this book that just launched, Voice for the Voiceless, is saying basically that we Tibetans are also human beings on this globe. We have the right to maintain our identity. We have the right to exist. So therefore, the problem that Tibetans are facing today in Tibet is existential threat. But over the last more than 60 years, Tibetan struggle led by His Holiness the Dalai Lama is a totally non-violent, compassionate movement. Although we have every right to engage in violence where every part of the world is doing, but for this last so many years, we stuck to the policy of compassion and non-violence, negotiation, dialogue, and His Holiness also came up with this approach of middle way policy. That means let us not talk about what is the situation of Tibet, whether Tibet is part of China or not part of China. Let us not talk about it, leave it to the historians. But what is important is looking forward. Whether you like it or not, our lands are joined, right? So if solution comes through negotiation and dialogue, it will be a long-standing solution. If the solution is carried out by bullying, by oppression, by use of gun, and by threatening, it will never be a solution. So on this important occasion, with humility, I would like to send this message to the ordinary Chinese citizens, that if you turn any page of the history, you will never find a dictator has succeeded for long. Because what they are doing is against human value, against human nature, against human kindness and love. Therefore, it is highly, highly important the Chinese leaders should now change. His Holiness, with great patience, outlived all the Chinese leaders. He met Mao Zedong, he met Deng Xiaoping, and then also he lived the period of Hu Jintao, Wen Jiabao, and all this. And most of these people are gone, but His Holiness is still being hopeful to bring about a solution about the issues of Tibet. Because this problem is not just issue between Tibet and China, it's an issue, it's an example for the whole world. And therefore, the world community has a reason to support the Tibetan struggle. If you today forget Tibet, just as in the past when Tibet was struggling and invaded by Tibet, most of the world's either lack of knowledge or lack of initiative, they did not pay much attention. And thereby, Tibet was ruled by China for so many years. Now, look at the border between India and, which used to be border between India and Tibet. Now they call it border between India and China. Whatever be the case, when Tibet was a buffer zone and free country, we did not have to put even a single soldier between the border between India and Tibet. Now today, several thousands of armies are stationed on the border. So this is the problem, not only for Tibet, but problem for many neighboring countries. So it is really, really far-sightedness wise to support this kind of compassionate, non-violent struggle. So that's what I wanted to say. The fourth commitment is preservation and promotion or appreciation of ancient Indian tradition. And His Holiness has very clearly said that I call myself as a son of India because my mind and brain is filled with Indian spirituality coming from Buddha, Nagarjuna, Shantideva, and so forth, and my body is filled with Indian rice and dal or chapati. Therefore, he calls himself as son of India, and this is not to offend China. He says, I'm son of India because what he learned is from Buddha. He is Buddha's son. And we usually, in Tibetan Buddhism, we call them spiritual son. So there's nothing, awkward about this. But somehow our Chinese leaders easily get offended when we tell the truth, unfortunately. Recently, when His Holiness said, my rebirth will come, they got very offended. They are using now geopolitics as an issue. But we are not playing any geopolitics. This process of recognizing reincarnation has been there for centuries, for decades. And we are simply saying we'll continue this tradition. And they get offended. What to do? So I think it is really important to properly understand what they are doing. On the one hand, they are relentlessly destroying the Tibetan culture, Tibetan identity. On the one hand, they are interested in recognizing His Holiness's reincarnation by a regime who does not believe in religion. I cannot find a joke more than this. Really. Right? So anyway, the important point is that His Holiness is always saying that it is probably only India which has the capacity to bring together the modern education and the traditional education of dealing with emotions and human reasoning. Only India. So therefore, he's really working very hard to, whether you call it promotion, preservation, appreciation, whatever. It's very, very important, especially in today's world, when people are really running towards the material glamours. Now people are talking about ChatGPT, people are talking about artificial intelligence. Yes, to some extent, this may be the need of the hour, but to my little knowledge, even if you're surrounded by all these shiny, powerful, clever gadgets, but all this, and at the end of the day, all these gadgets are used by human beings. And if these implements, if these instruments, if these gadgets are given in the hand of people who have no sense of ethics, who have no sense of compassion, who have no sense of humanity, I am really, really alarmed. The 11th and 9th happening in New York is an example, if you want me to remind that. Then all the uses of atom bombs, ballistic missiles, which is happening right now, is an example. The machines, they themselves don't go to fire and kill people. It's used by human beings. So therefore, it's very, very important that we should learn from the Indian tradition of developing mental calmness. We call it shamat and vipassana, the analytical meditation, one-pointed meditation, dealing with negative emotions, dealing with anger, dealing with jealousy. Unless we deal with internal destructive emotions, I can 100% say we will never have happiness. We may get some fleeting pleasures, but never happiness. So therefore, I don't want to try to elaborate, we don't have much time, but I really want to say how important these commitments are. And His Holiness is committed to this universal ethical values and spirituality, not only for this life, he is committed to do this continuously for many, many lives to come. And that's why it's so heartening for us to hear His Holiness saying that my reincarnation will come back. So that is, I think, what I should say in English. In Tibetan, just 2 minutes, then I stop. May I say, sorry? Ale, oh yeah, yang ngising ni lah ni saya jauh. No, okay, okay.